welcome to another episode of the Eat Scottish Mussels podcast. We are really pleased to welcome today Konstancja from Seafish. She's the Ecosystems Service Researcher, and we've asked her here today because she loves mussels. She's very passionate about mussels. She has a lot to say, and she's also done some research into the environmental impact of farming mussels and bivalves. So we will hand over to Konstancja, and she will tell us a little bit about herself. So hello, Konstancja.
Hi, Kelly. Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here today and share this one of my greatest passions with you. So as you said, I am a ecosystem services researcher at Seafish, and I'm focusing on ecosystem services of commercially important bivalves with a focus on water quality. So my work looks at how shellfish, particularly mussels and oysters, for example, contribute to water quality improvement in the UK. My background is marine biology. I've also studied fisheries science back in the day, but for the past few years, I've been fully immersed in the world of aquaculture. And outside of my PhD work, I work as a researcher at Seafish, and I'm just really interested to see how shellfish contribute to water quality improvement, because it ties into the broader mission of Seafish, which is supporting the UK seafood industry. And shellfish sector often flies under the radar. It's often goes maybe unnoticed, or it's not really that often talked about. And I think it's really important to always look at like all the aspects of the ecosystem, the coastal zones, and how they interact, and also the industry and the shellfish world. I think it's really pretty.
What triggered your interest in marine biology? How did that happen?
I think, well, it started very, very young, and it started when I started diving. Actually, it's a family thing we do, and I think once you've seen beneath the waves, it's really hard not to be obsessed. And I think that's when it started. I wanted to become a marine biologist. I moved countries for this degree, and I was hooked. But in terms of bivalves, the journey to that wasn't exactly planned. It's something that happened, I would say, organically. Because for most of my life, I thought mussels, holiday food, something you eat by the seaside in the summer on holidays, and maybe sometimes something you hear about in biology classes when we learn about water filtration. So it wasn't until my undergraduate studies that I really got a glimpse into the world of bivalves, and I thought, hey, that's neat.
Yeah, I think you're right, though. I think it's the whole, once you see underneath the water, and I think that is sometimes the disconnect that people have with marine life, because you can't see it. And I think, if it was the same as land agriculture, for instance, and people could physically see what was happening to the earth, to the ground, if they could see what was happening underneath the water, they, like you, would get a passion for it and want to, do something to protect it.
Totally agree with you. I think if it's unseen, it often goes unnoticed. It's out of sight, out of mind kind of mentality sometimes. And it's also a bit harder to relate to it sometimes, especially marine animals. We obviously have cute dolphins and whales, but then you have lots of things that are not as adorable as a sheep on the field or a cow in the barn, and we're all excited for agriculture. But in the world of seafood, for example, in marine biology, you have fish, you have bivalves, which we'll talk about today, and they might not necessarily be as appealing to the general public, but it doesn't matter that we shouldn't be completely in awe of what they do, actually, because they are really, really complex. And I think that's one of the things that drew me to this research. I like this kind of puzzle, like how does it interact with each other? What's happening in the background? I think this is really, really what gets me going every day.
We talk about them collectively as bivalves. Can you tell our listeners something about bivalves? What is a bivalve? What does the definition mean?
So it's a part of the shellfish group. So those include clams, mussels, oysters, scallops. we can think of them as two hinge shells that protect that soft, squishy interior that we like to enjoy in our risottos and spaghettis. What makes them, I think, fascinating is how they feed. They are filter feeders, so they draw in water and filter out teeny tiny particles of food like algae or phytoplankton, and in doing so, they help clear up the water around them, which makes them incredibly valuable for the marine ecosystem. And that's how they get their highly nutritious content. They are like at the bottom of the food web, so they are really, really condensed nutrients.
And it's probably worth just defining the distinction between wild caught bivalves. You mentioned, when you went on holiday as a child, you used to eat mussels on holiday, and farmed reared bivalves. What's the distinction between wild and farmed?
So it's essentially farming shellfish or bivalves specifically in the ocean instead of harvesting them from wild. It's low impact, it's highly sustainable way to produce seafood while benefiting marine ecosystems and limiting exploitation of it. It provides a reliable source of food, but it doesn't put extra pressure on the wild shellfish stocks or the wild bivalve stocks, giving them the chance to recover, to thrive, and to expand further. And I think that's what makes a big difference in terms of the wild and farmed shellfish.
What brought you to my attention was the fantastic report that you did for Seafish, which I read, absorbed, thought it was fantastic. So can you tell us a little bit about that report?
It's good to have some positive feedback on it for sure, but I think it was a bit technical for sure. There's also a blog about it actually for people who want something slightly easier to digest when it comes to that kind of content. But a bit more about it right now. So I'm looking to quantify the ecosystem services in the UK of those commercially important bivalves. So just to explain what ecosystem services are, it's all the goods and benefits we receive from healthy, natural ecosystems. It could be recreation, can be well-being, it can be food, as for example here. So this is what ecosystem services are. In the case of bivalves, I was specifically looking at the ecosystem service of water quality improvement. And then we're working closely with the Agri-Food and Biosciences Institute in Belfast. And we had support from NOAA and the USA and Longline Environment in the UK. So it's a big project that kind of draws on work done all over the world. It's not a new concept. It's something that has been studied for decades at this point. It's started out in the Scandinavian countries, in Denmark, and then it just progressed from there. So the idea of using bivalves for clearing up the water from natural things that are in there. So we looked at blue mussels, we looked at Pacific oysters, native oysters, Manila clams, and how they remove excess nutrients from the water, because that's the kind of let's say contamination we're looking at. Too much nutrients, too much nitrogen or phosphorus, they can cause a problem. They are natural building blocks of life and we love them. They are really, really important, but like with anything in life, too much of anything is a bad thing. So when you have too much of nutrients, too much nitrogen, too much phosphorus, this can cause algal blooms because they feed on those nutrients. So there's too much of them, and then that causes eutrophication. So that's a bit of a problem for many industries, for us, for our leisurely time at the seaside, for fisheries, things for the ecosystem itself, and bivalves, if they feed on algae and phytoplankton, they remove that. So the question is, does aquaculture actually help that? Does it expand this benefit of the natural reefs as well? And the answer is yes. And then we looked into it, and based on some data recently from 2019, we estimated the UK shellfish industry removed between 126 tons to 286 tons of nitrogen. With mussels, they were leading the way, but that is at the point of harvest. That's how much they remove. And when they put it in their body, they put it in the shell, they put it in the tissue, and when we harvest that, we remove it from the system that is water at that point in time.
Right. So by removing the nitrogen from the system, it's essentially making the water healthier. Is that correct?
Yes. So too much nitrogen, as I said, leads to algal blooms, which can cause less light going into the bottom of the sea, which negatively impacts what's at the bottom. It can reduce the amount of oxygen in the water, which has very negative consequences for fish, other organisms, and that can cause also die out of multiple organisms, and eventually the ecosystem becomes less balanced. It's not healthy.
I mean, our natural ecosystems are fantastic in regulating themselves. So, for instance, if we didn't have mussel or oyster farming to contribute to that nitrogen removal, how would the natural environment regulate itself, or wouldn't it? Is that becoming a problem that it's not?
Well, I think we've been exploiting a lot of natural populations of bivalves for quite a while, which caused a collapse in many places. We can think of an example from Solent. I think that's a close one here, where the population collapsed due to harvesting, and without bivalves filtering the water, excess nutrient buildup leads to murky water, problems down the food chain, massive dies of a fish, things like that. So it is a big problem. The system can self-regulate, but if we are going past its natural ability to self-regulate by putting more and more nutrients that come from runoff from agriculture, from streets, from our gardens, when we use fertilizer, when the rain comes, it eventually leads to the sea, and all those nutrients from our beautiful flowers eventually come into the sea, and they exacerbate the problem. So not only are we increasing the amount of nutrients, but we also are taking away the natural capacity, we're reducing it, and we're taking out the filters of the sea.
What would happen if the marine ecosystem collapsed?
Well, it would cause massive losses to us, loss of food source for sure. It would also have impact on our climate as well. I mean, it's already having impact on that. For collapse could also cause erosion of land, so we would be losing that. So I think it's out there. It's not online. We don't feel as connected to it, but it does dictate everything that's happening around the climate, the atmosphere. It's really important. Organisms like bivalves or seagrasses, for example, they are massive carbon sequesters. They take away carbon, they store it in the water, so it is removed from the atmosphere. But if we lose them, if the ecosystem collapse, we don't have that. We don't have that capacity to self-regulate the entire Earth. Yes, it's all interlinked. We need a holistic way of looking at things. Everything is connected.
Explain to me how mussels and oysters filter water. What's that process?
Okay, so they take in water through their siphons, pumps, and they filter it through their gills, where they are able to grab small particles of food like phytoplankton, like algae, like detritus, organic particles, and then they digest it and they assimilate the positive, the building blocks into themselves. They grow, they put it in the tissue, they put it in the shell, and then they excrete, obviously, what they don't eat. But that's like any other animal. So
I think when we talk about mussels and oysters filtering water, sometimes there's a perception that they're filtering bad things.
Yes. So mussels and other bivalves, right, they can absorb and accumulate anything from the water, also including certain types of contaminants. This is obviously something that can make a red flag appear, and it's like, okay, that's bad. But this is why we have strict regulations in place that ensure that shellfish meant for human consumption come from clean, monitored waters. In the UK, bivalve farms are regularly monitored for water quality and contaminant levels to make sure safety of the bivalve itself, but also safety for the consumer. So when you buy mussels from a reputable source, you can be confident that they are safe to eat.
Mussels in your native Poland are seen as a really clean source of food.
Yeah, it's like canaries in coal mine, I think. Mussels have been used as bioindicators of health of the sea, the lakes, rivers, depending on the species. And in Poland, where I'm from, freshwater mussels are used in drinking water treatment plants to detect contaminations because they have low tolerance for pollution. They are very sensitive. And once there is contamination in the water, they close. They won't be eating that. They don't want that. It's bad for them. And they are very, very sensitive animals. So when they close, or multiple of them close in the system, it triggers an alert, and it prevents contaminated water from entering the public supply. It's a really simple but a brilliant way of using nature to monitor like water quality and to protect it. And it's sometimes better than using chemical tests because they're usually very specific, and mussels respond to a wide range of pollution. So they are the first, I would say, defense that protects our health back at home. Bivalves are more than just filter feeders. They also tiny climate warriors, I would say, because as they grow, they build their shells using something we call calcium carbonate. It's a natural process and it locks away carbon. So first they absorb carbon from their environment by extracting carbonate ions, and they use this to build their shell, and they combine it with calcium. So this forms the calcium carbonate we talked about. And some carbon is also stored in their tissues as well, not only the shell. So meaning as long as they live, that part of carbon is locked away as well. And if the shell, for example, ends up buried in the marine sediment, the carbon stays trapped for centuries, hopefully, and it acts as a form of natural carbon sequestration. And it reduces the amount of carbon dioxide, so CO2, in seawater, and it helps maintain a balanced ocean environment. I'm sure many of us heard about the ocean acidification, and that is one way to help offset that. It's not a silver bullet, it's not a cure-all for anything, but as with other nature-based solutions, it's a natural way to help ocean regulate itself and be part of, I would say, a comprehensive way to just making sure we expand natural processes to work for us and for the earth.
Yeah. So again, by choosing to eat mussels and oysters, you are impacting the health of the environment in general because you're helping to generate something that sequesters carbon in the water.
Yes, by eating mussels, by eating oysters, by eating bivalves in general, you are supporting the environment, you are helping the industry, you're helping your local area, sometimes you help the oceans as well.
A lot of people are scared of preparing mussels. It's kind of the unknown, or they think it's a lot of faff. They can't be bothered to do that, so they would buy something that's pre-prepared. But actually, when you start preparing them and using them regularly, it's actually easier than peeling a potato, I would say.
True, I would agree. I spend a lot of time in my kitchen, and I think getting a mussel-based meal is faster than getting a roasted chicken, much easier. But there's nothing wrong with getting the pre-prepared mussels or oysters from the store. They can even be marinated in some different spices or herbs. So there's also a great way to eat them. They are still equally nutritious, and you still have the moral boost from eating them. So I think if you opt for that option, that's still fine.
So we know mussels have 13 different micronutrients, making them super healthy for overall general health. We call them a superpower. They're a little superpower because they contain all of these wonderful nutrients that we need to keep healthy. How is that linked to the nutrients that they take from the water?
Some people might be aware that there was recently like a boom in algae-based products, seaweed-based products, because that's they are very nutritious. They are pure in terms of like they photosynthesize. They create their own building blocks in a way, and this is what bivalves feed on. So they are feeding on this very, very pure source of nutrients, and they accumulate that. So they themselves are full of vitamins, minerals, omega-3 fatty acids, and that's why they are so healthy. So their filter feeding lifestyle makes them one of the greatest protein sources there is, and very nutritious.
What advice would you give to people that are a little bit scared of eating them?
I think one of the biggest issues that I've noticed in the UK when it comes to eating shellfish, people are afraid of shellfish poisoning, and valid reason. There are multiple ways that this can be prevented, and in the UK there is monitoring and preventative measures in place, and with proper handling the risk is significantly reduced. So you shouldn't be too worried about that. There is so many regulations put in place to help you as a customer to stay healthy, to stay safe. It's really in no one's best interest to sell bivalves that are contaminated, that might be a cause of a disease or upset stomach, because it doesn't help the farmer, it doesn't help the environment if you don't eat those shellfish. It's really those people, I've met them, and obviously one of the reasons why I love working in the shellfish sector is the people. Oh my God, I was so surprised. I love interacting with them, and they really are passionate about what they do. They take pride in what they do, the product they put on your plates, and they really want it to be good for you, good for the environment. They want it to be healthy, they want it to be safe. So if you trust the beef producers and chicken producers, you should also be able to trust the shellfish producers. Yeah.
It's so true. Yeah, I would definitely reiterate that. That the passion from the people that bring that product to your plate should be assurance enough for somebody to pick up that product. And you're right, we have confidence in chicken and beef and everything else that we buy from supermarkets or from a butcher. But lots of people have less confidence in seafood. And perhaps that is again, it's connected to the unknown because it's underneath the water and we can't see it. So it may be this disconnect that we have as consumers because we can't physically see it.
But at the same time, can you see a fish? I mean, if you're on land, do you see the fish that you later have in your fish and chips?
Yes, true.
I don't think, unless you go underwater, you can't really see it. And I think that's something to consider if you trust fish. Something else may be deeper underneath that we feel that they are unfamiliar. Their texture or the briny flavor can take a while to adjust to. I think a lot of people don't grow up eating mussels or oysters. And I think early exposure is actually one of the things that really helps change the perception of consumers. Early exposure to seafood in schools, for example, and at home can help build comfort with the food. I was exposed to them when I was a kid, and I'm absolutely fine with them. But my friends see them as some slimy concoction on the plate. But there are great initiatives in the UK, like the Fish in School Hero, helping to promote healthy food that like bivalves in school and fish, and children get to interact with them and they find out what they are, how they work, and I think that really encourages them. I was always taught from school onward that mussels, oysters, they are the cleanest meat that there can be, and this is something that I took to my adulthood, and I always thought that I was really surprised when people were sharing how worried they are, and I never thought of that. I was actually never concerned until I started learning more. I was like, maybe it should be.
Yeah, I think you're right. Early exposure is important, and that's why these programs that that schools have access to in the UK are so important. So if you're in England and Wales, for instance, you can get access to Fish in School Heroes, as you said. And in Scotland, they have Seafood in Schools, which is organised by Seafood Scotland. And we also have actually on our website, eat@scottishmussels.co.uk, we also have access to educational resources through the Sustainables Academy that teaches early stage pupils about mussel and oyster farming and all the nutritional benefits. What do you think are the challenges that the industry is facing and are going to face?
Bivalve aquaculture is a great industry. It's a great sector to be in. I know I'm biased, but really there's a lot to be admired, especially if you consider all the difficulties that mussels and oyster farmers have to face. And we talked about earlier about, like, you know, they take pride in what they do and they want to provide a safe product. They have to do so much more in the background to be able to deliver that product to you. That also speaks to their determination for that product to be good. And we've talked about the public image and about the worry of safety of consumption. That's certainly a big challenge for the industry. And sometimes water quality can be an issue. An unprecedented heat wave, ocean acidification that affects the shell and the strength of the bivalves. There could be high influx of harmful contaminant at some point, which can cause a closure of the site, and they all can cause massive losses at the farm, mass mortalities. Mussels are sensitive, as we said before, to diseases and changes in their environment, so they require good quality water to thrive and grow. So in a way, farmers are really, really exposed to what we do with the water that we all share. So this is something that we have to always be mindful of. The safety is also taken very, very seriously in bivalve growing countries like the UK. So there's complex, quite costly regulatory framework for farmers to navigate, and they have to ensure compliance with food safety standards for the safety of consumers. So always keep that in mind. Yeah, these are obviously not all of them. These are just some of the examples that come to mind when you ask about that. And it's not easy to address them either, I think. It requires a combination of marketing, of technology innovation, of changing the perception of the consumers, effective management. And it's really, as we said in the very, very beginning, that marine ecosystems and land, they are interconnected. So when we want to improve the situation of the shellfish farmers, we also need to make sure that what's on land and gets to the sea is also not hindering those ventures, I think.
You know, and I think we've got, as an industry, a really good opportunity to widen the reach to a younger generation that are not familiar with these as a regular eating product, a regular source of protein. So I think there is a big opportunity for us there to reach out to those. And certainly in the academic community, there is a lot of interest in bivalve farming. And a lot of that is connected to studies about food security. How do you see that interlink, and why is the academic community so interested in bivalve farming?
There is an increase in the demand for seafood in general, for protein. The population is still growing. So we have limited land resources. We cannot expand cow fields or sheep or wherever farming indefinitely. And this is where aquaculture, and specifically bivalve aquaculture, comes into place, because it requires no feed, uses minimal resources, provides high protein food source, and has low environmental impact. It doesn't require on land space as well, to some degree. Obviously, it's much less than certain other types of food production, and it can help address food security on a global scale. You might not think of the UK maybe initially, although this is also a place where we need to introduce more protein from seafood. But we could also export, and we can help with the food security on a global scale this way. An interesting number, I think, that comes to my mind right now is if you develop just 1% of suitable tropical coastline for bivalve farming, that could provide, I think, food for over 700 million people.
Wow.
And we in the country, I think, a few years ago, we produced as UK slightly under 16,000 tons of bivalves in the UK. And I think you can see those numbers. We have a lot of potential as a nation. It's an island, let's be honest. There's plenty of coastline that is good quality, that would support local livelihoods if people have those jobs. It's a beautiful thing to also teach your kids about. It's great food. So I think if we expanded that, it would really benefit everyone. And it's not only bivalves. You can mix them with seaweed farming. You can mix them with salmon farms, something called multi-trophic aquaculture. That's perhaps the way in the future. So there's lots of research, because there's lots of doors opening for us, and there's lots of interest because a lot of people love shellfish. They are tasty, they are nutritious, and we need to consider it's something that we could also use in different sorts of products. It doesn't have to be like this. It can be maybe a mussel nugget, or maybe a protein powder. But either way, we need to expand that production. So that's why there's lots of research into it to see how it can be done sustainably, safely, efficiently. So
great. And you mentioned multi-trophic. So this is something that I've heard before. Can you just explain about that?
So that kind of aquaculture or any sort of food production that's multi-trophic tries to emulate the natural situation where things feed on each other and they coexist in a sort of a balance. So you can have something that feeds on the bottom. You can have filter feeders. You produce some algae or some seaweed and you put fish in there. And that is the different trophic levels. So different levels on the food web in a way. They coexist, they feed off each other, but we manage to expand it. We might manage to intensify that production in those systems.
It's obviously a passion of yours as a diver, free diver, I think you said, didn't you? You see under the water, you want to protect it. So why is it so important to choose sustainable seafood?
I think first we need to answer ourselves what sustainability is. And it's meeting our current needs without compromising the ability of future generations to meet theirs. And I think that's why it's important to eat sustainably now. So the future generations, your grandchildren, they can also enjoy that. They can also enjoy the beautiful outdoors. They can enjoy the sea. They can go diving with their elderly granny Konstancja. That's why I'm working in the shellfish sector, because this can help, because it's part of a sustainable solution. It's not only shellfish. There's lots of other things that come into play with this, but it's one of those steps towards a sustainable future. And I think this is why it's important. You will never have a fix-it-all solution, but you need to invest in those separate pieces, and then eventually they come together and they create a future where everyone can thrive and enjoy themselves.
Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us. This has been enlightening, motivating, uplifting. We definitely need to get people to eat more mussels and oysters in the UK, without a doubt. Thank you so much.
Thank you very, very much. And support sustainable seafood. Not only great protein source, but an eco-friendly choice.